The first sign of danger was not the movement of ships, but the silence. It spread across the galactic channels like a shadow, cutting through the usual chatter of traders, patrols, and distant outposts. For centuries, the stars had hummed with voices, warnings, trade deals, and desperate cries. But now, where once there was life, there was a heavy stillness that pressed on the minds of every species. And at the center of that silence was one name spoken only in whispers: humans. The warning had been given countless times, carried from fleet to fleet, told in the corners of smoky cantinas and over encrypted transmissions between captains. Do not attack the humans. Do not provoke them. And above all, do not think that you can strike and then escape. Once they set their eyes on you, there would be no fleeing. Those who ignored the warning were gone, their ships drifting as wreckage or their colonies erased without a trace. Yet still, arrogance lived strong in the galaxy. There were always those who believed they could bend history, that their fleets were different, that they could do what no one else had done before: hurt humanity and survive. The aliens who planned the strike were certain of their strength. Their warships were larger, their cannons heavier, and their empire older by thousands of years. They had crushed dozens of younger civilizations without effort. To them, humanity was still a recent arrival in the galactic stage, stubborn and loud but small in number. They saw Earth and its colonies as vulnerable prey, and they convinced themselves that one swift strike could break human pride before it became dangerous. What they did not understand was that humanity's true power was not in numbers or weapons. It was in something far deeper, something the galaxy had never faced before. The first shots were fired without hesitation. A human colony world was struck, its defenses overwhelmed in minutes. The aliens thought they had proven their superiority, that the warnings had been exaggerated myths spread by fearful merchants. They cheered as they bombarded the settlements, watching human cities fall to dust. They believed the humans would retreat, would beg for peace, or at least vanish into silence as so many others had. Instead, they heard something else, a transmission that reached every ship in their fleet, carried in a voice so steady that even the most hardened warriors felt unease. "You have struck us. You will not flee. We are coming." The moment those words were spoken, the mood shifted. The crew who had laughed a moment ago now felt a chill that their commanders could not explain. They looked at the wreckage of the colony and, for the first time, realized it had not ended there. The humans had not surrendered. They had not even slowed. They were waiting, and the fear that began to gnaw at the alien fleet was not of the damage they had done, but of what was about to come back at them. In the days that followed, human ships appeared where no one expected them. They moved through the dark like predators, striking suddenly and disappearing before a counterattack could land. Alien patrols went silent, their vessels never returning. Convoys carrying fuel and supplies to the invading fleet were found destroyed, their escorts ripped apart with terrifying precision. It was not a war fought in equal lines, but a relentless hunt, and the aliens realized too late that they had become the prey. Each battle was a message, each ambush a warning made real. Once humans had you in their sights, escape was not possible. The alien commanders ordered retreats, but the retreat only brought more terror. Hyperlanes they thought were secure became traps. Bases they tried to flee toward were already taken. The humans had studied them, anticipated them, and now moved with the patience of hunters who knew their prey could not escape the snare. It was not the size of the fleets that mattered anymore, but the will that drove them. The humans fought not just for survival, but with a determination that shook the galaxy itself. They did not strike for territory or conquest. They struck because they refused to let their enemies slip away. Rumors spread faster than ships could travel. Entire sectors whispered of human retaliation, of fleets vanishing, of planets burned in return for the first strike. Some said the humans did not sleep, that their soldiers carried a fire inside them that no alien could match. Others claimed that their technology had advanced overnight, that they had built weapons no one had ever seen before. But those who had truly faced them knew the truth. The humans were not faster or stronger. They were simply unwilling to stop until the enemy was finished. The alien fleet that had once marched proudly into human space now found itself shrinking day by day. Supplies dwindled. Morale cracked. Crews whispered about the warning they had ignored, about the old voices that had tried to tell them the truth. Do not attack the humans. Do not imagine you can wound them and then flee. And as the fear grew, so too did the silence on the channels. Fleets that once roared with confidence now moved in desperate whispers, trying not to be heard. Because if the humans heard, they would come. And once they came, there would be no escape. In the heart of it all, deep within the command ship of the alien fleet, the leaders gathered. Their eyes were heavy, their voices sharp with panic as they tried to form a plan. They spoke of abandoning the war, of retreating beyond human reach. But even as they spoke, they knew the truth pressing against their thoughts. There was no beyond human reach anymore. Not after what they had done. The darkness of space stretched outside their viewports, silent and endless. And then, without warning, alarms rang. Ships dropped from hyperspace, human ships, not in thousands, but in enough to end everything. The alien commanders stared, their last hope crumbling as the human fleet moved with calm precision, as if every step had been predicted long ago. The warning they had ignored now echoed in their minds louder than ever before. Do not attack the humans. Because once you do, they will never let you flee. And as the first human weapons lit up the void, the alien commanders finally understood that the silence was not absence. It was the sound of hunters closing in. The human fleet moved like a shadow across the stars, but behind their silence was a long and difficult history that most of the galaxy never cared to understand. Before humans were feared, they were dismissed. To the great empires, Earth was just another small world on the edge of a spiral arm, a planet too fractured and too late to the galactic stage to be taken seriously. Other species had already built great alliances and vast fleets while humans were still divided among themselves. The galaxy believed humanity would remain weak, too scattered to matter. That belief was the first mistake. When humans first reached the stars, they did not arrive with polished fleets or centuries of unity. They arrived carrying the scars of countless conflicts with each other. But from those scars came something no other empire expected: resilience. Where others saw war as weakness, humans saw it as hard-earned experience. They had faced near extinction on their own world many times, whether from nature, from one another, or from disasters they could not control. Each time they endured. Each time they rebuilt. And when they stepped into the galaxy, they carried that same unbreakable instinct with them. It was said that the first alien traders who met humans were unsettled by their eyes, not because of their shape, but because of the intensity in them. Humans had the gaze of those who had survived storms and still chose to move forward. That intensity became legend among travelers, and even before humans had powerful fleets, whispers of their will spread quietly from port to port. Still, the larger empires dismissed them. A few planets, a few colonies. What could they truly do against civilizations with thousands of worlds? The answer, no one wanted to believe, was simple. They could fight in a way no one else dared. The aliens who struck the colony had no interest in history or whispers. They saw only what they wanted to see: numbers, ships, resources. They thought in terms of charts and statistics, believing war was measured by how much metal one could throw into the void. To them, the humans were nothing but a fragile chain waiting to break. But war is not fought on numbers alone. War is fought in spirit, and spirit was the one thing humans never lacked. On Earth, news of the attack spread like wildfire. The images of burning settlements and lost families traveled faster than light across the networks that bound humanity together. Anger rose, sharp and heavy, uniting billions who might have disagreed on everything else. For once, their differences vanished in the face of something greater. It was not just about the loss of one colony. It was about the message sent, that someone believed humans could be struck down and forced to flee. That belief ignited something ancient, something the galaxy had never truly faced before: human defiance. The leaders gathered, military and civilian alike, but the decision was not made in quiet rooms. It was made in the hearts of ordinary people who demanded action. Volunteers flooded recruitment stations. Shipyards lit up with relentless labor. Old warships, some decades out of service, were dragged from their docks and refitted overnight. The galaxy often mocked humanity's hunger for speed, their restless drive to do everything faster than necessary. But now, that restless drive became a weapon in itself. Where other empires required years to prepare a fleet, humans took weeks. And within those weeks, a storm began to form. Yet even as the ships launched and the soldiers armed themselves, there were voices whispering caution. Older captains, men and women who had crossed alien space for decades, spoke of the warning that had been carried from one corner of the galaxy to another. They told their crews that the aliens who struck them had ignored it, just as many before had. Do not attack the humans. Do not think you can hurt them and escape. The young soldiers listened, some with disbelief, some with grim satisfaction, and all with a growing sense of purpose. They were about to become the very proof of that legend. On the alien side, fear spread quietly, though their leaders tried to mask it with pride. Reports filtered in of convoys gone missing, of patrols vanishing. Some claimed they had seen human warships appear where no hyperspace routes should have allowed them. Others whispered of weapons that tore ships apart with terrifying accuracy. Commanders dismissed the rumors as cowardice, but in their private moments they wondered, had they awakened something they did not understand? The truth was that humanity had prepared for this long before the first strike. They had studied the empires that surrounded them, learning their patterns, their blind spots, their arrogance. They built not just ships, but strategies, ways to fight larger enemies by striking at what truly mattered. They knew that to fight the galaxy, they could not match its size. They had to break its will. And so, when the first colony fell, humanity did not panic. They focused. Every move, every strike that followed was not random. It was planned, calculated to remind the enemy that retreat was impossible. Deep inside human command, there was no illusion about how dangerous the war would be. The aliens were stronger, richer, and more experienced, but that only sharpened humanity's resolve. For them, it was not a war of conquest. It was survival, pride, and vengeance. They would not simply drive the invaders back. They would make them remember. They would make them regret. Among the soldiers preparing to launch were those who had lost family in the first strike. Their grief turned into something unshakable. They trained harder, moved faster, fought with a fire that no order could dampen. The galaxy often thought humans too emotional, too reckless, but it was that very emotion that now made them unstoppable. Each loss only fueled the drive to strike back harder. Each memory of destruction sharpened their aim, and so the fleets began to move. Not in endless numbers, not in waves of overwhelming firepower, but in precise strikes that felt more like a hunt than a battle. The aliens tried to predict them, but predictions failed. Human ships appeared where they should not be, vanished before a counterattack could arrive, and struck again from unexpected angles. It was the breath drawn before a storm no one could escape. The human fleet advanced deeper into enemy space, but each movement carried risk. The enemy had numbers on their side, and their empire stretched across hundreds of systems. On the surface, it seemed impossible for humans to challenge such vast power. Yet every human strike cut deeper than it should have. Every ambush left scars far larger than the size of the fleet itself. This was no longer a war fought in open lines. It was a war of nerves, of precision, of patience. Whole sectors began to feel isolated, and even before the human fleets arrived, panic spread through outposts that now felt abandoned. The aliens were beginning to learn what humanity already understood. War was not just about destroying fleets, it was about destroying confidence. Among the human ships, tension hung heavy in the air. Every soldier knew what was at stake. They were not just fighting for survival, but for every colony, every family left behind. Some carried grief like a weapon, driving themselves harder than exhaustion allowed. Others carried fear, but refused to let it break them. In mess halls, conversations were quiet but sharp. They spoke of the first colony that fell, of the children lost, of the faces they would never see again. Those memories became the fuel that lit every battle. For them, the war was not abstract, it was personal. Still, not all humans agreed on how far the war should go. Within the command, arguments burned behind closed doors. Some leaders pushed for total retaliation, a campaign so merciless it would ensure no empire dared raise a hand against humanity again. Others urged restraint, warning that pushing too far could unite the galaxy against them. The debate remained unresolved, but the soldiers on the front lines could not afford to think of politics. For them, the enemy was real, close, and relentless. On the alien side, cracks widened in ways their leaders refused to admit. Captains grew hesitant, officers argued during briefings, and the morale of entire fleets began to collapse. The older veterans remembered the old warnings. Some of them had even seen what happened to other empires who had once dared to strike humans. Some species began withdrawing from the alien empire's side, unwilling to risk being caught in the storm. The galaxy itself was watching, waiting to see which side would break first. But within the human fleet, there was another kind of struggle. The soldiers were strong, but strength had its cost. Weeks turned into months, and fatigue set in. Every battle, every ambush, demanded precision, and mistakes were not forgiven in the cold of space. Pilots pushed themselves past the point of safety. Engineers worked until their hands bled, keeping ships alive that should have been wrecks. The humans had prepared for the Empire's fleets, for their weapons and their stubborn pride. They had not prepared for a third presence stepping into the war. Across the battlefield, distant signals began to appear, faint at first, then clearer. Ships, massive and silent, slipped out of the void on trajectories neither side had predicted. They bore no insignia of the alien empire, and their design was nothing like human engineering. They were something else, older, unfamiliar, and they were watching. The galaxy had always been filled with whispers of hidden powers, civilizations too ancient to involve themselves in the petty struggles of younger species. Most dismissed these stories as myths, bedtime tales for soldiers, but now, as the strange ships moved with impossible grace, the myths became terrifyingly real. And for the first time since the war began, both humans and aliens realized they were not the only players on the stage. The alien commanders panicked, demanding to know whether these newcomers were allies or enemies. No answers came. The humans, sharp and cautious, held their fire, unwilling to reveal weakness until they understood what they faced. But the silence of the newcomers was more frightening than any weapon. They did not speak. They did not signal. They simply observed as if weighing both sides, deciding what was to be done. The second twist changed everything. What had been a war of vengeance now threatened to become something larger. If this unknown force chose to intervene, the humans might not only lose their chance at victory, but the entire galaxy could fall into chaos. The Empire, though shaken, found a spark of hope in this. Perhaps these ancient ships would see humanity as the greater threat and strike them down. Perhaps survival would come not from their own strength, but from intervention. Within the human fleet, debates sparked instantly. Some argued that they should continue the attack and ignore the newcomers. Others warned that one wrong move could turn an already impossible war into complete destruction. The commander of the flagship listened in silence, weighing every word, every possibility. Their people had come too far, sacrificed too much to back down now. Yet even they felt the weight of the unknown pressing against every decision. As the tension grew, the alien empire tried to seize the moment. They launched a sudden counterstrike, hoping the disruption would confuse the humans enough to give them an advantage. Their fleet surged forward, weapons blazing, cutting through the dark with desperate fury. For a heartbeat, it seemed they might overwhelm the humans. But humanity had not built its reputation on fear. Even caught between two enemies, they adapted instantly. Squadrons shifted into new formations, countering the surge with precision. The battle ignited, chaos exploding across the battlefield. And still, the silent ships watched. The clash was unlike any before. Human warships weaved through the storm, striking at weak points with surgical precision. Alien fleets pushed forward with sheer numbers, determined to break through. Explosions lit the void, debris scattered across the stars, and still both sides felt the weight of being observed. Every soldier, human or alien, could not shake the thought. Were they fighting each other or performing for something far older and far more dangerous? Among the humans, whispers began to spread that the newcomers were testing them, watching to see how far they would go. Some believed they were waiting to strike against whoever showed weakness. Others feared they would destroy both sides to prevent further chaos in the galaxy. No one knew the truth, and that uncertainty was worse than any weapon. The alien empire tried to hail the mysterious ships, sending desperate calls for alliance, for aid, even for mercy. No reply came. The ships simply remained, silent and immovable, their presence alone enough to shift the balance of fear. Humanity did not bother to send calls. They knew there was no begging from powers like this. The only answer they could give was the same as it had always been: fight, endure, and never flee. As the battle raged, the humans began to notice something unsettling. The interference that had clouded their systems was fading, but not evenly. Their ships regained clarity faster than the aliens did. It was subtle, but undeniable. Someone wanted humanity to see more clearly. Someone was favoring them, or testing them even further. The realization sent ripples through the crews. Were they being manipulated into pushing harder, into proving something to these silent watchers? And if so, what happened when the test ended? The stakes had risen beyond anything the humans had imagined. No longer was this simply about vengeance or survival. The future of their place in the galaxy might be decided here, not just by their fight against the Empire, but by the judgment of those who now watched from the shadows. The humans pressed forward, every strike more precise, every maneuver sharper. They fought not only to end the Empire's hold, but to show that they could not be broken. Yet doubt lingered. Some in the human ranks wondered if they were playing into a larger trap. What if this hidden power had engineered the entire conflict, waiting for the moment when both sides were weak enough to be destroyed? What if humanity's refusal to retreat was exactly what doomed them? These questions echoed in the silence between battles, but no one dared to speak them aloud. To speak them was to admit fear, and fear was not allowed. On the alien side, desperation turned into recklessness. Commanders pushed their fleets forward too quickly, trying to prove strength in front of the silent watchers. The result was disastrous. Their lines broke, ships collided, and humanity exploited every mistake. In their fear of judgment, the aliens destroyed themselves faster than the humans ever could. And still, the silent ships did nothing but watch. The climax loomed closer. Both sides were bleeding, both sides burning, and the presence of the unknown weighed heavier with every passing second. The humans had fought wars before, but never with this much uncertainty. They were used to fighting enemies they could see, enemies who would fall or flee. But now, the possibility of a force beyond comprehension hung over them. And in that possibility was a truth none could escape. Victory against the Empire might only be the beginning. The battlefield grew darker as wreckage drifted like shadows across the void. Human crews worked frantically to hold formation, alien ships scattered in desperation, and the silent watchers loomed above them all. The humans knew they were walking into something far greater than vengeance, but they also knew there was no turning back. They had sworn not to let their enemies flee, and now they could not flee themselves. The tension reached its peak as the humans prepared their next strike, one that could shatter the enemy's defenses once and for all. But the question that haunted every soldier was no longer whether they could defeat the Empire. It was what the silent watchers would do once the battle was over. And as the void burned brighter with fire and steel, that answer remained hidden, waiting like a shadow just beyond reach. The silence of the mysterious ships pressed on every heart as the battle reached its breaking point. The humans had pushed the Empire's fleets to the edge, carving through their defenses with a precision that looked less like war and more like inevitability. Alien ships burned across the void, stations shattered, and the once proud formation that guarded the Empire's core world now looked fractured and desperate. The humans were closing in, their engines burning bright, their weapons ready to finish what had begun with the first strike. Yet still, the watchers remained silent, as if waiting for this exact moment. On the human flagship, the commander gave the order that would seal the Empire's fate. Squadrons surged forward, targeting the enemy's final shield generators. Waves of fire erupted as human torpedoes and railgun blasts ripped through the defense grid. Explosions cascaded across the black chain reactions, tearing open holes that had once been thought impenetrable. The aliens fought back with ferocity, but it was no longer enough. Their discipline cracked, their formation broke, and piece by piece, the core world's defenses fell. The alien commanders screamed for reinforcements, for order, for anything that could hold the humans back. But the reinforcements never came. Their fleets had already been scattered, their supply lines destroyed, their empire bled dry by the relentless hunt. They had ignored the warning, and now the price was carved into every burning ship. Even as their guns fired, many of their soldiers knew the truth. It was over. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had broken the heart of an empire that had stood for centuries. The humans pressed on, driven by grief, rage, and the promise they had made never to let their enemies flee. Squadrons dove through debris, soldiers aboard carriers prepared for the final push, and the fleet as a whole moved with the unity of a single will. This was the climax of everything they had fought for, and they would not falter. The alien defenses fell in waves, and the path to the core world opened wide. Humanity had won, or so it seemed. Because just as the humans prepared their final strike, the silent ships moved. For the first time since they had appeared, the ancient watchers acted. Their vessels shifted in perfect formation, faster and sharper than anything either side had ever seen. Beams of light lanced across the void, not at humanity, not at the Empire, but into the wreckage itself. They cut through burning ships and shattered stations, not destroying what remained, but disintegrating it completely, leaving nothing behind. It was as if they were erasing the battle itself, stripping away every trace until only silence remained. Both humans and aliens froze. Weapons hung in silence, engines dimmed, and comm channels filled with confusion. No one could understand what they were seeing. The mysterious ships were not choosing a side. They were wiping the battlefield clean. And in that act, a deeper fear spread, because it was no longer about war, no longer about victory. It was about control. On the human flagship, the commander ordered the fleet to hold position. Attacking now, without knowing the Watcher's intent, would be reckless. Yet waiting carried its own risk. Already, whispers were spreading through the crews. What if these beings had come to ensure no one escaped? What if neither humanity nor the Empire were meant to survive? The answer came moments later, though not in words. The mysterious ships projected a field across the void, encompassing both fleets. Systems froze, weapons went offline, engines dimmed. Humanity's most advanced technology fell silent in seconds, as if it were nothing more than toys in the presence of giants. Even the alien commanders, who had once been so proud of their endless fleets, sat powerless in their darkened ships. The Watchers had stripped both sides of everything but their voices, and then finally a signal came. It was not in any known language, yet every soldier, human and alien, understood it. It was not words exactly, but meaning pressed directly into their minds. The message was simple. This war ends here. Shock rippled through both sides. The aliens, desperate for survival, begged for mercy. They pleaded that humanity was the aggressor, that they themselves were only defending what was theirs. The humans, in turn, refused to remain silent. They spoke of the colony that had been burned, of the families lost, of the promise they had made never to let their enemies flee. Their voices carried the weight of everything they had endured, and they would not be silenced even by powers beyond comprehension. The Watchers listened, their ships humming with quiet energy. And then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, they chose. The alien fleet, what little remained, was pulled away in a surge of light. Entire ships vanished in seconds, erased from the battlefield as if they had never existed. The humans braced for the same fate, but it never came. The field that had trapped them flickered, then released. Their systems roared back to life, weapons and engines snapping online as if nothing had happened. The message burned into every mind one last time. Humanity, you are not to be pursued. And then the Watchers vanished. The battlefield was left in silence once more, broken only by the drifting wreckage of ships and the pounding hearts of those who had survived. The alien empire was broken, its fleets erased, its power shattered. Humanity stood victorious, but not in the way they had imagined. They had fought with fire and fury, but it was the intervention of an older, unseen hand that had sealed their fate. The galaxy would whisper of this day for centuries, not just as the day humanity proved unstoppable, but as the day the Watchers revealed themselves. On the human flagship, the commander stood in silence, staring at the empty void where the Watchers had been. Victory should have felt certain, but instead, unease pressed heavier than ever. The enemy had been defeated, but the price was a new truth. Humanity had been judged. They had been allowed to win, not entirely by their own strength, but by the will of something older. And if the Watchers had chosen differently, humanity could have been erased just as easily. The soldiers did not care in that moment. For them, the war was over, and the promise had been kept. The aliens who had struck them first had not been allowed to flee. The vengeance was complete. They cheered, they embraced, they wept for those who had been lost. But beneath the celebration was a quiet thread of fear. Because if the Watchers could end a war with a thought, then humanity's future battles might not be against empires, but against those who judged from the shadows. The galaxy held its breath in the aftermath. Neutral worlds watched with awe and terror, realizing that the old warning had grown even darker. It was no longer just, do not attack the humans. Now it was, do not provoke them, because even the hidden powers of the galaxy will not let them fall. The humans had become not just survivors, but symbols of something greater, something dangerous to those who would ever think of testing them again. But in the quiet halls of human command, as the fleets began their long journey home, the commanders exchanged uneasy looks. They had won the war, but they all understood the final twist. They were no longer just hunters. They were being hunted too, watched by eyes that had chosen to intervene once and might one day intervene again. Humanity had proven themselves unstoppable against empires, but the galaxy had just reminded them that even the unstoppable were not free from judgment. And so the climax closed not with peace, but with a new shadow hanging over every victory. The humans had kept their vow. They had not let their enemies flee. But in doing so, they had drawn the attention of something that might never look away. The human fleet drifted in the silence of victory, engines burning low as the wreckage of battle floated around them. The empire was gone, its core world stripped of defenses, its fleets shattered and erased. Yet the humans did not cheer the way conquerors were expected to. Their voices were quieter, their faces thoughtful, and in every glance there was the memory of what had just happened. They had won, but it had not been only their doing. The mysterious Watchers had intervened, and though the empire was destroyed, the humans were left with questions that weighed heavier than triumph. On the flagship, the commander walked the corridors, hearing the mixture of relief and unease in every conversation. Soldiers who had fought harder than anyone thought possible now spoke of home, of the families they longed to see again, of promises to rebuild what had been lost. Yet even in their joy there was caution. The war had proven their strength, but it had also revealed that the galaxy was not as simple as enemies and allies. There were powers hidden in the dark, powers that could decide the fate of entire civilizations in a single moment. The subplots of the war began to close one by one. The operatives who had worked deep inside alien space returned, their names still secret, their missions unspoken. But their eyes told the story of what they had seen, the empire crumbling from within, the terror that spread when humanity struck with precision. They were welcomed as heroes, though most would never know what they had sacrificed. The reconnaissance teams that had found abandoned alien colonies carried their memories too. They spoke quietly of empty cities, of people who had fled before the humans ever arrived. For some, it was proof of justice, but for others, it was a haunting reminder that fear could empty worlds without a single shot fired. Back on Earth, the news of victory spread like wildfire. Billions who had watched the war from afar filled the streets in celebration, their voices echoing with pride. They had endured loss, they had endured fear, but now they saw themselves as something greater. Humanity was no longer a young race struggling to be noticed. They were a power no one could ignore. The warning that had once been whispered in secret had now become undeniable truth. Do not attack the humans. Do not imagine you can strike them and escape. The Empire had tried, and it no longer existed, but beneath the pride, questions remained. The Watchers had erased the Empire's final fleets, sparing the humans, and then vanished without explanation. Why had they intervened? Why had they chosen humanity over the Empire? And most importantly, what did it mean for the future? Some believed it was a sign that the humans had been chosen to carry a burden larger than themselves. Others feared it was only a temporary mercy, a warning that the Watchers might one day return to judge them again. The uncertainty lingered, a shadow behind the light of victory. The commanders met in quiet chambers to decide the path forward. Some argued for caution, to withdraw and rebuild, to avoid provoking the Watchers again. Others pushed for expansion, believing the galaxy now feared them enough to stay out of their way. In the end, a balance was struck. Humanity would rebuild its colonies, strengthen its fleets, and prepare for whatever might come next. But they would not seek war for its own sake. They had proven their point, and for now, that was enough. For the soldiers who returned home, the resolution was more personal. They carried the scars of battle, the faces of those they had lost, and the weight of promises kept. They had sworn that their enemies would not flee, and they had made good on that vow. Yet in the quiet nights, many of them wondered about the Watchers. Had humanity truly won by its own hand, or had they been guided into victory for reasons they could not yet see? That question did not have an answer, but it kept their determination sharp. If the Watchers returned, they would be ready. The galaxy itself changed in the aftermath. Neutral species, who had once watched in silence, now shifted their alliances. Some moved closer to humanity, hoping to gain protection or favor. Others retreated into isolation, afraid of drawing human attention. The old power balances had shattered along with the Empire, and now the galaxy was reorganizing around a new truth. Humanity was a force no one could dismiss. The warnings were no longer whispers. They were laws etched into memory. As weeks passed, the wreckage of battle was cleared, and the human fleet finally turned for home. The stars stretched wide before them, carrying both promise and uncertainty. They had fought for vengeance and survival, but what they carried now was more than victory. They carried reputation. They carried fear. They carried the knowledge that when they fought, the galaxy itself trembled. That power was a shield, but it was also a burden. To be feared was to be watched, and humanity knew the Watchers' gaze might never fully leave them. The unexpected twist of the climax left its mark in every mind. The humans had not been destroyed when they easily could have been. That meant something. Whether it was mercy or a test or something deeper, none could say. But it changed how they saw themselves. No longer were they only fighters defending their own. Now they were players in a much larger story, one that reached beyond empires and into the secrets of the stars. The resolution came not in a single moment, but in the quiet acceptance of what had been gained and what had been lost. The humans would rebuild their colonies, honor their fallen, and carry forward the strength that had carried them through the storm. The galaxy would remember their defiance, their refusal to retreat, their promise kept. The Empire would remain only as a memory, a warning carved into history. And the Watchers, unseen but not forgotten, would remain as the shadow of a larger truth. As the human fleet crossed the void, the commanders stood at the viewport, watching the stars slide past. They thought of the colony that had been burned, the families who would never return, the promise made in that moment of loss. The promise had been fulfilled. The enemy had not fled. But even in victory, the commander knew the story was not truly over. Humanity had proven itself to the galaxy, but in doing so, it had drawn the eyes of something greater. And perhaps that was the final lesson. To be human was not to be safe or untouchable or even certain. To be human was to stand against the impossible, to endure when no one believed you could, to carry forward no matter who watched or judged. It was not about being chosen by the Watchers or feared by empires. It was about never backing down, no matter the cost. The war was over. The humans had returned stronger than ever, their place in the galaxy secured. But as they moved forward into the unknown, one truth remained above all others. a truth carried in whispers across every world. If you strike humanity, do not expect to escape. They will come for you. They will not stop. And even the stars themselves will remember.